All right, everybody, welcome to this week's installment of the Life Coaching Training Hangouts here at coachinghangout.com. I am Sean Adams. I'm the founder of these here Hangouts. We sit around and talk every week about all things that are coaching related, topics about coaching, things that are specific to coaching. And this week our topic is skills. What are some of the skills that you need in order to be an effective coach? And it also grew out of a conversation from 2 weeks ago of the difference between the skill difference that you need for being a coach versus the skills that you need to run and facilitate a mastermind, and those are two different skill sets. So we're just going to talk about skills in general. What are skills that you need, and then start to look at like skills that you can pick up just as you're starting out as coaching, get trained as a coach, get trained as a facilitator for a mastermind, those things, and how those differ and grow and build off of each other. So that's what we're doing today. And as we always do on these Hangouts, I'd love to give anybody else who's decided to come along a chance to say hello. Dr. Allen, you were the first person in, so I'm going to let you go ahead and say hello to the world.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Allen. I actually have a new title that was bestowed upon me by Alex Mandossian after his event that we were all at last week, and that is App Architect. He said, tell everyone you're an app architect. So I'm an app architect, and I build iPhone, iPad, desktop, and Android apps for people and their businesses. And I'm a regular on this, at least I try to be a regular on this coaching call, so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. We're glad to have you here. And yeah, it's always great to have you here. You always have some really great insights. You definitely have a lot of life experience to bring to the table, which is great. And we appreciate that you're always here sharing your thoughts and ideas when you can make it. So. And then next up is Nika, if you want to say hello to the world.
Well, I will say hello to the world. Today is quite a different day in our country because the first 40 dead bodies came home today. It's very impressive to see what happened from the crash of the MH17 of Malaysian Airways. And to put it into coaching topic, I saw some amazing coaching of our Minister of Foreign Affairs with one of the people who lost a significant other. It was great to see and a great example of the whole world how you can coach and comfort at the same time. And after a while, I wasn't sure who was giving comfort to whom. So it really, really was impressive to see. And a good example to open our hearts and to do a lot of good for the world. That's my introduction for today. I'm a speaker coach from the Netherlands, and I can add to my own skills international TEDx speaker coach because I got some coaching in Ireland going on as well.
Excellent. Congrats on that. And I'm glad. I like the way that you brought up the other topic and talking about how it comes when there is a tragedy like that. There's options that can be made, and it's nice to hear that your country is taking that option of supporting and being as positive as possible instead of turning it into some negative thing, which could very easily happen. So it's good to hear that the leaders of your country are taking that right approach and being responsible in that way. So I just wanted to applaud that and honor that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
No worries. So today it's all about skills and what skills do you need. And so if you've been watching these Hangouts for a while, you know we talk about a lot of things that you need. Everything from how to do the interview process to how to pre-qualify, disqualify. We talk about a lot of things that need to be in place for your business to be successful, but we don't always necessarily talk about you as a person or as an individual. What are the skills that you need to develop? And I think that I'm going to start with the most basic, but oftentimes the most difficult for people to learn. And if you're going to ever have any hope of being successful as a coach or to be successful at getting coached by someone else, the single most important skill that you can develop is the ability to listen effectively. I always like the saying that God granted us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use those proportionately. So you should be listening twice as often as you are speaking if you are doing things correctly. And it's not just listening for the exact words that are being said, but the real, especially as a coach, it's learning to listen to what's not being said, what's being kind of happening between the words, listening for inflection. If you happen to coach in a way that you can see the person, watching body language to see what's going on there, those are all aspects of listening. It's not just listening to the voice, but it's listening to what's not being said, listening to what the person is doing with their body, those kind of things. So to me, listening is the single most important skill that any coach can develop. I'd love to hear from the two of you. Do you agree with that, or is there a skill that I'm missing that's even more important?
I totally agree with you. Listening always first. Otherwise, you're talking to someone, and it's not coaching. Coaching is always a vice versa interaction, and if you listen, you can have that interaction on an appropriate way. I think that's the basic thing first. I agree. How about Dr. Allen, our app architect?
Okay, well, there you go. Well, listening is very, very important, no question about it. But I have two other skills that I think are, three other skills that I think are very, very important, and either at the same level as listening or even higher up than listening. And the first one is a Jewish term that you might know. It's called being a meshuggah. A meshuggah is sort of like a little bit crazy, not totally out of your mind, but you got to be a little bit crazy to be a coach, I think, because you have to deal with all sorts of people all the time, and you get to meet their personalities and their own craziness. So you almost, and we've spoken about this before, there is this little element of therapy that's required to be a coach, because the clients don't know where to draw the line between coaching and psychotherapy. So you have to sort of reel that in, but you got to be a little bit, meshuggah to be able to do that. The second thing is, did you guys ever hear that expression before?
No, but I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, good deal. Have you, Sean?
I've heard the word. I've never really fully understood its definition.
The second thing is, I think you have to be a little chameleon-like in the ability to really work with lots of different people so that you can relate to a lot of people. I think good coaches have a skill to be able to identify with their client and have the ability of the client to identify with them. So you'll get clients that are super successful, and they have to feel that you can work with them. You don't have to necessarily be at the same level of success, because just like a sports or athletic coach, you may not be the greatest tennis player in the world, but you could coach the greatest tennis player in the world. You may not be the wealthiest person or the most successful person in the world, but you could be a coach to that person. And you also could run into people that are first starting out and need someone to help them through, the early phases of where they want to go. So you have to be chameleon-like to be able to get everyone to identify with you and for you to identify with them. And then I also think you have to have that skill that I think is also important if you're a physician. And it was really some of my weakness as a physician, to be perfectly upfront and honest, and that is to not get overly personally involved in what's going on, because with patients, if they don't get better when you're hoping they do or what you do, if you're not good at that, you can't sleep at night. You almost feel the sensitivity of being part of their family, and you would like to get them better and you can't. I think the same thing with coaching. You have to maintain your objectivity and not get over personally involved in it, because you lose some of your effectiveness at the time, and plus it becomes very stressful to you as the coach. You start taking on the burden of everyone else's, what they're dealing with, and it's very, very stressful as a coach, and you need to be able to maintain your objectivity and not burn yourself out at the same time. So those are three things I would add to the listening protocol.
Well, and I think I agree with all of them. I don't know if I fully quite grasped the meshuggah piece yet, but for the chameleon, it's true. We always talk about the danger that a lot of coaches fall into is they try to be everything to everybody, which is different than what you're talking about from the chameleon perspective, where you're not trying to be everything to everybody, but what you've done is you know how to adjust your language to match each person and each interaction that you're having. So it doesn't mean that you're trying to coach small businesses, large businesses, tennis players and golf players all at the same time. You know what your niche is, you know who it is that you coach. But when it comes to that, each individual has their own personality. Some people might need to be, really pushed hard with firm deadlines, and somebody else might need to have that more cheerleader, rah, 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 you're doing really well type coaching experience. And it's knowing what works best for each individual person and making an adjustment. I assume that's what you mean by the chameleon part, Dr. Allen.
Absolutely, that's right on the money. That's exactly what I mean. And so, there is I'm going to add one more piece of there. It was a movie by Woody Allen that I can't remember the name of right now, where he plays a chameleon. I don't know if it was called Chameleon even. And one of the problems is that you could lose your own self inside somebody else. So you need to be able to be the chameleon and at the same time maintain your identity to be effective. So I think there are two aspects to that chameleon story.
Yeah, I think that you as a coach, you have some kind of a geek, something that makes you special. And when I thought about this topic, what came up to me was what you will add to the coaching as a skill needs to be appropriate for your clients. If you're very good in sport, it's no way you're a good speaker coach. It's what's your uniqueness? That's like what is your niche? What you said, Sean. But it needs to your skill needs to be appropriate for the kind of coaching you do. You need to have to be effective for your type of clients as well. And exactly what you said, Dr. Allen, is don't take it personal. Let it be effective in a professional way. Coaching is a profession, it's not a hobby.
Yeah.
So you better make sure you have that right as well.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something that you just said about like if you're an athlete, you may not be a good speaker coach, that kind of thing. And I think one of the things that I find very interesting is there's a lot of professional athletes who eventually try to coach within their sport and things like that. And what often happens is the people who were the absolute top premier players at their game as an athlete don't necessarily make the best coaches. They might be better things in other ways, in administration and things like that. A lot of the best coaches may have played the sport, but they weren't like the elite top 10 in the world at what they do. They knew the sport, but they have a different skill set than just being pure athlete. They have something else that helps them come into those coaching roles. And sometimes some of the best coaches never actually played the sports they coach in, but they have a way of understanding it and seeing it from a different perspective and motivating their players to be successful. So I think all of that stuff is really important to note, that just because you were successful at something doesn't mean that you can coach somebody else at that. So I think that's an important piece. Go ahead, Dr. Allen.
Yeah, and I think what you brought out a great point, and I think Ninker started this point actually, and I think you hit upon it. And I think that one of the things that people need to realize is that helping someone get more successful, success is such a wide scope of qualities and characteristics that you have to add into the mix to become successful, that you could be the greatest athlete in the world from the skill level, but yet you don't have the right mental attitude. You're not emotionally prepared to be successful. You have distractions going on in your life. So for me, let's say, the greatest basketball player in the world wants me to coach them. They don't need me to coach them on how to jump. They don't need me to coach them on how to pass the ball. What they need is they have other areas of their life that might be totally disheveled and a mess, and that's the skill I can help them with. That's why some people get lost as a coach and think, and I started the conversation, well, I have to be the richest man in the world to coach the richest man in the world. No, someone might have a lot of money but can't develop personal relationships. Someone might have a lot of money and they're successful, but they're just not a happy person. Someone, or they might want to go in another direction and they don't have the skill set to take, how they're known, what they, how they're recognized, and really, take that and bring it to the next level. You don't play sports forever. So what someone requires in coaching, that's a skill as a coach. you need to recognize that that everyone is a potential to work with you if you can, develop that, that match. But what someone needs is the ability for you to figure out what they really need is a skill as a coach that they may not be able to put their finger on and may have nothing to do with what they've already accomplished already.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll be working with like a small business and they're like, well, you help us get better at marketing. Sure, I can teach them concepts of marketing, but what I end up finding is what they're doing for marketing works very well. They're just disorganized. And so they might have a really active, say, email list who, when they send out a coupon, they come in and everyone comes in and buys based on the coupon. Works very well. They get great returns off their marketing, except for the fact that they send a coupon out, once a month maybe. They might have sent it out the first week of this month, and then they forget for 4 months, and then they send out a coupon 6 times in a month, and they're just disorganized. If there's a system and a process and we can give them a structure, it's not the marketing that they actually needed, it's structure and organization that they needed. So sometimes it's knowing that. It's exactly what you're talking about, Dr. Allen. You've got to actually be able to identify what they really need, not just what they might be asking you for help with. I want to be a world-class basketball player. Well, you have all the athletic abilities, you have all the skills, you all have all of that. What about your mental game? Like, what are you doing nutritionally? Like, are you eating, those kind of things might be what's actually causing you to not be at the absolute top of your game. It has nothing to do with your athletic ability, your ability to shoot a jump shot or whatever it might be. It has to do with that everything else is out of whack, which is affecting your abilities in that way. So you got to be able to identify what the real need is, not just what they kind of are saying they think their need is.
Yeah, I see that a lot in my speaker coaching, because people have a great story, really worth sharing with the whole world. But then some little things come up and they will lose their words, or they can't remember a thing, they freeze on stage. All things are happening. There's nothing to do with the speaking. It's all about the mindset. But also very heavily overweight people who want to copy Anthony Robbins on stage, totally out of breath. They need another kind of coaching because they're not fit, they can't breathe, stuff like that. So you have to be really aware, like you say, what they need, what's the question behind the question, and that's the listening skill as well, and the coaching ability, the coaching skill to tap in exactly by asking the right questions, what's really going on. And if you can hit that, they will improve if they're ready.
Yeah, and I think all of this is important. It all kind of builds together, and I want to make sure we do spend a little time talking on the other thing that Dr. Allen and Inga, you mentioned it too, which is that disconnection. I think that's an important piece that we want to talk about as well, in that we're not talking about not having empathy or not caring about your person and their success. That's not what we're discussing when we say disconnection. But if you take the concerns, the worries, the troubles of every single client and they stay with you all the time, you are going to be a miserable person because you're going to be dwelling on all of these things. It doesn't mean that you're not dedicating time to help them move forward. It's not that you aren't concerned that they don't have the success they want and you want to get them there. All of that still has to happen. You have to have enough passion to be able to want them to succeed. But you cannot take on their stuff as your own. You will burn out quickly and be just absolutely miserable.
And you can't coach if you do that. If you are too heavily involved with all the personal things or the business problems that your coachees have, you get involved in all that. How would you go on with your next one in half an hour time if you're dwelling with your first one? You can't have the real focus and the appropriate attention to be present for your other coachee as well. You have to have that border of professionalism, and just make sure if you close a session, you will close a session and not go on and on and on in your mind. It's not fair to your other coachees as well, and not fair to yourself, and not fair for the one you are coaching, but you're not doing a professional job. And it's nothing to do with empathy, but with acting professionally.
And this is where it comes in, and a lot of times we'll talk about the fact that when you're scheduling your coaching calls, you never want to have straight back-to-back where you hang up and then pick up the phone and do it again. You need 10, 15 minutes between. I like 45-minute coaching calls, and every coaching call starts at the top of the hour. And a lot of times people think, oh, that's so that in case one runs long and you don't have problems with them overlapping. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that you need to be able to clearly separate what happened with coaching client A and what's going on with coaching client B, and not bring those things together, because it's not fair to either of them. If you're holding on to the first one, it's not fair to that person because you're not actually reflecting on what might be best for them, because you're trying to give your attention to coaching client B, and coaching client B is only getting a part of your attention because part of your mind is still focused in on the other person. You have to be able to make that distinction. Even for this, I do a lot of work for other people, but they all know that this hour, this time slot from, say, 11:30 to 1:30 on Wednesdays, I have everything else closed. I close emails. I close Skype. I mean, they may be open, but I don't reply to anything. I focus strictly on what's happening in these Hangouts. The only time I might just move away from the Hangout or look like I'm doing something else is if it triggers something that I want to find online or something like that that is Hangout related. But if I'm worried about my other job while I'm doing this Hangout, you're not getting an effective Hangout. You've got to be able to make those distinctions. You've got to be able to separate and give each person their attention. They're paying you well for that. They've earned it, and they deserve it. You need to give that to them.
Yeah. I think we mentioned another time as well, be honest to your potential client if you're not the right fit for them. That's a skill itself as well. Don't run after every client because you think you can all help them, or even worse, you need the money. Even worse, because you might get into the mistake, you end up with either the wrong clients or you don't serve well because you're not exactly the right person.
Yeah, I've never met a person that in some way I cannot be a benefit to.
That's something different.
My coaching client.
That's something different.
A lot of folks that I can help. I might make somebody I make somebody laugh, and so that's my way of helping them. That doesn't mean they hire me as a coach. It just means I have a role in their existence that works. You've got to be able to be clear. I coach in this area. These are the type of clients I'm looking for. Just because over here you might need 1/100th of what I offer in my coaching does not make you my coaching client.
Yeah. And have that really clear before you end up coaching someone.
Yeah, I think I too used to think there isn't one person that I couldn't offer something to, and then I met my first wife. Anyway, so with that said, I think another thing that is really important, and I think this is a skill that I'm very, very fortunate to have, and I think you need this skill as a coach, and that is a certain level of intuitiveness to be able to, if it takes you 6 coaching sessions to get a sign of who you're working with, it's probably not the right person for you. I usually have the ability to read people very well and very fast so that I can get a sense right away of where we need to be going, what we need to be doing, and if we could work together. And I think that's a great skill that you have to have, because otherwise you are just spinning your wheels and you're not moving it forward, and you're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. And that becomes frustrating for both parties. So I think you need to be able to do that, not only in coaching, but even, sometimes, and I think, as I said, I think this is a good skill I have, even at an event, like we were just at an event, I could read at least I believe this about myself, I think I'm able to read even an audience. If I'm asked to get up on stage, I can read the audience, what's been going on with the audience, and react to that with my presentation pretty much, at the line of scrimmage, where I say, I have a sense that in order for me to be effective in what I'm going to say to this group, I need to start, from a place of power and grab their attention, where other times I get the sense of, I got to ease myself into this group. That's what they're going to need for me to be effective. And I think it's the same way in coaching. You have to have an intuitive sense about who you're dealing with and be able to do that at a fairly fast rate.
Yeah, exactly. I call it in my book the third eye and the third ear. Just tapping in to what's not seen or not heard already, because you know what's going on, because that's your skill. And you can do it as a speaker, you can do it as a coach. Sometimes, and even say I plug in, and I start to sense I can open that door of being sensitive, what's needed. I can close the door as well. If you stay open, you get into the situation, like Sean said, you get into everything. But if I plug in, I can just sense what's needed. And I'm pretty honest with them as well, and I announce that up front if that's okay. But well, I will do that because I believe it's necessary to be honest and authentic and open to them, because that's what I expect from them as well. But this really, the third ear and third eye, you use it in a larger audience and in the coaching as well. I recognize that completely. Yeah. You're not the only one.
It's definitely a learned skill. It's a lot of intuition and being able to kind of feel into what's going on. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of new coaches fall into is a lot of the times you pick up those unspoken cues in silence. A lot of times if there's a pause, a new coach has to feel like they have to fill that pause. And you've got to really get used to that uncomfortable silence, because sometimes that uncomfortable silence is where your coachee, the person you're coaching, is going to want to fill that space, and that's where they start to say some of the deeper kind of hidden things that they might not be saying. Because a lot of times people in coaching just tell you what they think you want to hear as the coach, but when you practice kind of holding uncomfortable silence for them, it enables that they will say and share things they might not have planned on saying or sharing, just to fill that void of the uncomfortable silence.
Yeah, or you have the other ones who keep on talking, and I stop them.
Yeah,
that's the other part.
Yeah, there's definitely a skill to the seasoned interrupt is what I'll call it, and it's not just getting them to stop because you don't want them to keep talking. But there's points when they're talking where you feel that start of a story starting again, where they're just repeating the same story over and over. And if you can find that perfect trigger point to stop, which is the underlying problem behind the story, getting them to stop on that pain point can actually often trigger them to have to really react to it, where the story is a way of dancing around it. A good, well-planned stop or interruption actually forces them to have to look at that thing that they're dancing around.
Yeah, I remember being coached by someone when I had a really, really, really tough time in life. And I had, I think, 45 minutes. I went to the person and I just started to share my week with all the trouble and all the shitty things what went on. And I think after 20 minutes, she stopped me and she said, "Well, how are you?" And I just went quiet and I started to get along with more story, like you said, Sean. But it's sometimes also a facade of what really is going on, just to have these big layers of talking. And that's what I mean. It would stop every now and then and see what's really going on. Sometimes it's a story. In my place, it was just a place where it was safe to share what was going on. And that's why I did that. I figured that out afterwards. But it was a really good moment for me to get that insight, what happened to me, what I can use in my own coaching business as well, because I experienced it myself.
Yeah, because a lot of times people will get stuck in story, which is really just living in their head, and those interrupts will cause people to have to force the emotional reaction, which is actually where growth and change is going to happen in a coaching session. So you have to be able to get them to react in some way emotional. Dr. Allen, I know you had a comment that you wanted to share, and I didn't want to miss that. You're still muted.
Yep, sorry about that.
No worries.
I did a hangout for Alex a number of months ago, and I told the story of the piano player, the jazz piano player, Thelonious Monk, because he had a unique skill of using silence between his notes And the skill really was to play two notes and make the listener put in the missing notes from their own mind, so to speak. And I think that silence is such a powerful tool that most people really miss it. And I will tell you that, if you're working with someone and their business, they might have a great product or your service, whatever, and they can't close anybody. A lot of times they don't use the art of silence. They don't know when to shut up. They just keep on rattling on, rattling on, rattling on. And a lot of people always oversell things all the time. They're always trying to oversell. I see that with doctors. I see that with, all sorts of businesses. They don't know the value of silence. So silence is a skill. I had a situation with my wife where she had a phone conversation come up, and my wife, does not understand the value of silence. So she always spills all the details, much more details than anyone needs, and usually it comes back to bite her in the butt, so to speak. She gave more information than was necessary, and when somebody was they already bought into what her point was, she then talks them out of it because she doesn't stop talking. And years ago, I used to be an expert witness when I was in Washington, D.C. I was an expert witness for personal injury accidents in court. And I would train other doctors how to prepare to be in court, how to deal with that situation, because if you don't deal with that situation on a regular basis, you don't know how to handle yourself. And the thing that most of them did wrong, that you had to coach them through, was they always wanted to volunteer more information to the opposing attorney than they needed to, and would usually give them information that they didn't have. So, for example, if someone, and I'll use a specific example that happened to me in a court case that I was involved in, that actually turned out to be the largest settlement in the history of the state of Virginia. And I wound up being covered in Jury Trial magazine. I had a featured article on me and everything else, but that's neither here nor there. So the opposing attorney, he did not remember the word malingering. So he kept on saying words that were not really relevant. So that he would ask a question and say, how many people that are really in an accident, instead of saying malingering, which is the accepted term, he would use another term. And so my job was not to help him win the case. My job was to help the person I was working for win the case. So when he asked that question, I would say, I don't know what you're talking about. Because I really knew what he was inferring, but it wasn't my job to help him out. So silence really was the key to winning that case, where when you're coaching somebody to do that kind of thing, the first thing you have to tell them is, shut up. There's certainly talent in being quiet. Just shut up. And a lot of times, that even as a coach, sometimes shutting up is the best strategy of all, and teaching people to do that also is a great coaching skill.
Yeah, it comes back to that first point of listening about the 2 ears, 1 mouth. You need to be listening more often than you're talking, and especially, I look at it from you guys know I work with folks who do who market things and sell products and things like that. And one of the keys is to, if you want someone to say yes to you, you have to shut up long enough for them to actually be able to say the word yes. If you keep talking and you keep talking, there's never a point to say, yes, this is what I want. And so you need to be able to make that. And remember, when you're coaching, it isn't about you. Ego needs to be checked at the door in coaching. That's oftentimes the reason a lot of people will keep talking is because they're doing it to make themselves feel more confident as a coach, when really you're there to listen to the other person and guide them in their growth in whatever it is. You don't have the answers. You are working with them to help them find the answers. So you've got to learn to not keep talking.
And also not talking with your body as well. It's not only shutting up, but also be aware of your own body language, That's a skill itself, and of course you can do all kind of NLP stuff, but knowing what you do yourself is a great skill you need as a coach to master it first.
Yeah, and we talked about body language a little bit, and that idea of body language and reading other people's body language, but it's a whole, you get much better at reading body language when you're consciously aware of your own body language. I could sit there like this while somebody was talking in this hangout, and it instantly makes anybody who's watching think, I don't care. I'm basically shutting them down. And it might be just because it's comfortable to lean back, but it doesn't mean, but the impression it gives is really bad. So if, let's say, every time Dr. Allen decided to share a comment, I just did this, Dr. Allen's not going to share comments very often because it's going to start to feel like I don't really give a crap what Dr. Allen has to say. And you've got to be self-aware enough to be able to be aware of other people's selves.
So self-awareness is a skill as well.
Absolutely.
Mastering silence and self-awareness, the ability to, use your ears and mouth in appropriate way. That's another skill set you have to master before you can really coach. And another thing is what I see often, that people bring on as examples their own problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So keep your it's not about you, it's the ego thing again, and of course it's always because they want to help and to want to comfort perhaps the other with, I've been through this as well, blah 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 blah. It's nothing to do with the coaching. It's most of the time not even appropriate. You can use a story, but just as a skill, keep that away.
And a lot of times coaches will do that because stories can be very powerful in helping to cement a lesson or a teaching or something you want the person to walk away with. And we can best speak from our own experiences, but when you start making it clear that it's your own story, your own experiences, you run into multiple problems. One is it becomes all about you. Two, it becomes the game of whose is bigger. And so then you become this competition of who has the biggest problem. Where even if you're gonna, as a coach, tell a story that is your own story to help cement a lesson, tell it in a third person. There was this person I've worked with who had this, and here's what ended up happening and how it worked out in the end. Even if it's strictly your story, and for new coaches, the only stories you have to be able to tell are your own, because you haven't coached enough people to have other stories to tell. But if you get in the habit of always telling it in a vague third person, you're covered, because then it's not about you and your own ego and your own story. And if you do end up telling the story of something that somebody else did, you're not actually telling enough details about them to break whatever confidentiality you have with them. So if you can get into that habit, it's an important aspect. A skill to have is telling stories in a third person way that's vague enough to not show too many specifics, to trace it to its origin, but specific enough to anchor the lesson you're trying to teach.
That's more the anchoring part than it's the story about me part.
Right. It never has anything to do with you. It has to do with whatever lesson you're trying to help the person be able to gain from it all.
Yeah. So the over willingness to help needs to be mastered as well in appropriate way.
Yeah, we are
helping is one thing.
Yeah, we're not there to save people. We're there to empower people to help themselves.
Exactly. How about you, Dr. Allen?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of something that may be also a skill, and that is to realize that coaching, like a lot of other things, like marketing, I guess, there's a lot of art, not just science. So not everything is going to be, not everything you tell somebody and not everything they do is actually going to work for them. And that's part of, the process. In other words, the skill is being able to know that a direction that or advice that you gave someone may not have worked for that person, is not to, stick to it. It should have worked. It worked for my other client. If it didn't work for you, you screwed it up. because sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's really being able to know when there's mistakes and what to do about those mistakes is also a skill that you need to bring to the coaching platform, because it is not all objective. There's a lot of, you know, give me that word. I can't get that word out.
That's my part. Struggling over English.
Ambiguities. Thank you. Ambiguities to it, and you need to be able to not get your ego in the way of sticking to something that is not appropriate. I think that's also something else that comes into the game.
Yeah, it's the fit of making it right for the right person as well, and don't. Well, we talked earlier about coaching programs with such a strict frame that they do everything the same to every coachee, because that's the line they walk through.
Exactly.
And so apart from, it could be your thing, but it could be a coaching program, you need to have this chameleon thing, the flexibility to see what's right for your coachee, and the flexibility to change to the right fit.
I agree.
Yeah, there is no one script that fits all when it comes to coaching. You still want to have maybe some basic steps that you're trying to take them through, but what that journey feels like is going to be absolutely unique to each individual person. It has to be, otherwise your coaching's not going to be successful.
Yep, I totally agree.
And how about the skill to celebrate with your coachee?
Yeah, I think there should always be celebration. There should always be, I mean, you always want to bring things back to places of joy, gratitude, however you want to, celebration, gratitude, whatever language you want to use. But there is that important skill of making sure that, maybe the skill I would say is being able to identify and focus on the positives. Because often coaching can be dealing with so many negative issues that they're trying to overcome or whatever. You want to make sure you're able to help them see the journey, how far they've come, how many positive changes they've made, those kind of things.
Yeah. I think that's a very important skill as well, to be able to see the improvement your coachees are making, and to celebrate with them, to anchor that positive thing as well.
Yeah, I agree. We're almost at 45 minutes, which is what I've been trying to keep these Hangouts to a little bit more so we don't run over too long, because I know everybody's busy. So I'm going to kind of pause here. I think this was probably a conversation we could continue for another Hangout, and I think maybe the skills part 2 will be next week. But I would love just to hear from the two of you if there's any, and I'm writing down skills part 2 so I don't forget that that's what I've now committed next week's Hangout to be. I'd love to kind of hear, like, what's the big insight, any last things you want to say about what we've discussed up to now that you want to share with anybody?
Dr. Allen, you first.
Okay. You know, one of the things I find about being on this this call, and I think it's a skill that I wouldn't have brought to the conversation until we had this call, because I wouldn't have thought about it. But what I like most about these calls that we do every week is that the calls, there's a unique skill to Sean that not everyone has, which I like. One, of course, is his skill to take complex thought processes and put them in simpler terms, which is really good for me, because sometimes I'll put out a really complex thought process and that Sean will just break it down to what it is. But there's also a skill he has to make the participants dig deeper. In other words, you know, we could have had a conversation about skill that was really somewhat up here, and, you know, everyone would have thrown out, well, here's a skill, here's a skill, here's a skill. But as these things unfold, we keep on digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and I think that's a skill that you should have as a coach also, and maybe one that I need to, you know, work on a little more, where I think Sean has that skill down really well, which makes him the perfect person to do this Hangout.
Thanks, Dr. Allen. I have to say I find I'm much better at facilitating a Hangout conversation than I would at necessarily teaching a 45-minute long Hangout. It's not my I'm naturally better at facilitating a conversation, so I appreciate that. But it is a skill I have, of facilitation. And everybody has their own unique skills, but some of these are needed ones to develop. So thanks for that, Dr. Allen. Go ahead, Nico.
It's a great overview what you have and ability to get more out of people, to benefit, and it's the facilitator part. I totally agree with Dr. Allen. The thought what I came up with is the listening, the being quiet, and to celebrate. These three things in the right combination. And what I'd like to talk about next time about skills is just to list some skills and see what's really appropriate in coaching and what you should avoid, especially for starting people. What you really need to avoid. We talked about briefly a few of them. What you should have and what you shouldn't do to be a great coach, to reach a lot of people and help a lot of people further in their life without being their nurse, to tap into my former background. I think that's really nice to hear next time as well, just to frame it a bit more and see if we can just list some things what people can just especially look at or something. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I think I like the idea of looking at it from a perspective somewhat of the skills you don't necessarily need, but sometimes are like often discussed that like, oh, you must know how to do. Well, you don't necessarily need to know how to do that. There's other, so there. I think that's a good idea. I'm just going to call it Skills Part 2, and I'm going to open it to see where it flows, and that I find that I don't like to overly plan where we're going with it. I'd like to have a general topic. Otherwise, I think that they're not. I think letting them be free to be able to become whatever they are makes them a much more effective hangout.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Yeah, I think a good part of that, I think what I'm going to bring next week I think for skills 2 for me, not to prolong this call, is skills I suck at. Because celebrating is not even in my vocabulary. You know what I mean? It's not it's my worst skill. Everything I do or whatever I accomplish, to me it's okay. Now let's get right on to the next thing. There's no time for celebration as a skill for me. So I think that's something that might be good for the conversation also.
Well, and I think that's true, and that goes back to that self-awareness, self-reflection. Yeah. You've got to know what you aren't good at. And so I think there's a humility there too that has to happen. But we'll continue that part on next week. Yeah.
Really great. Have a great week, guys. Look forward to see you on part 2.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Cheers for now.
Bye-bye. Are we still